So have you ever handed a parent or friend who has never played video games before a controller and tried to teach them how to play video games, but regardless of your best efforts, they just walk into walls and eventually give up in frustration? Well, I have good news for you. I may have found a way to fix that problem. In the previous episode, I talked about a phonics book style video game I made that taught 6 brand new players how to properly move, shoot, and jump in a first-person shooter, all in about 10 minutes. So one would imagine that playing a short and simple first-person shooter puzzle game like Portal would be a breeze. I was very, very wrong. I learned the hard way that even if a player knows what they need to start in a game, there are still so many other elements that can harm a new player's experience. So to try and make things better for new players, I did exactly what I did in my Deltarune video. I had a brand new player play through Portal and noted the numerous problems we came across. I then found ways to fix those problems and tested if the solutions worked with another test subject. Here are the results. So after quickly learning how to move, shoot, and jump in my Etra's Training Grounds program, I gave the first test subject, who I'll call Carolyn, an official Aperture Laboratories legally required testing aid I made, which shares some information that the game doesn't clearly tell the player. First, the sheet talks about what portals are, and it explains why they can't be placed on metal walls or moving objects. The sheet also notes that falls don't hurt the player in this game, and that all living test subjects are rewarded with cake. Everything was going great in the opening, since Carolyn knew exactly how to move and interact with objects from the program she just played. The first real issue with the playthrough came with the first real test chamber. This level introduces new players to the concept of portals by having an orange portal stay in one spot, and a blue portal teleport to different locations on a timer. This level was quite confusing to many normal players, to the point where it got completely reworked in Portal 2, with buttons that moved the blue portal instead of a timer. Now, I don't recommend doing this much, since most of the fun of Portal is figuring out how to solve each puzzle yourself, but guide your new player step by step through this test chamber. From what I've seen, they should still grasp the general concept of portals, especially if you talk over how they work again with the sheet while loading into the next test chamber. But that's not super necessary, since test chamber 2 here demonstrates how portals work a bit better by introducing half of the portal gun. Just make sure to tell your new player to look out this window while GLaDOS is talking. Once GLaDOS is finished with her speech, this door is unlocked and your new player can pick up the first half of the portal gun. Carolyn had a bit of trouble getting through this door, but after that she sped through the first 9 test chambers within her first half hour of playing. The game taught her how to work with buttons and energy pellets, how to time your actions, how to crouch, and how to jump. After the testing, I did some fancy math, which I'll get into later, but in these first test chambers, she was only 12 minutes behind an average player's playthrough of Portal, which meant at this point, she wasn't even taking twice as long to get through the game, which is pretty good for someone's first gaming experience. However, progress started slowing down when more timing and action-based concepts like jumping, momentum, and bouncing energy pellets were introduced. Carolyn made slower progress than average just because she didn't have the years of experience that would let her do something like this relatively easily. Instead, a whole lot of deaths and failed attempts at various actions started to frustrate her. But she was still having fun, even with this one energy pellet that just kept on repeatedly killing her. Yet all that frustration was nothing compared to the nightmare that was Test Chamber 16. The one with the turrets. In an average playthrough, a player would take around 8 minutes to finish this relatively difficult test chamber, not 32. The main issue with this test chamber was that Carolyn couldn't jump in the turret's line of sight, aim, fire a portal, and then get away in time before dying. And even when she did, it was difficult to aim blocks through the portal she placed to knock over the first turret, only to be killed by the second one. Then, when she finally brought a block shield, she would attack the second one, but couldn't turn away in time to protect herself from this third friendly fellow. The process of crouching and using a block as a shield was tedious, and Carolyn repeatedly lost a lot of progress every time she died. One thing she told me was that she just wished the level wasn't so long. She claimed she knew what the turrets did and had fun with them in the beginning, but really wanted to move on to something new, which is what would have happened in an average playtime of 8 minutes, but that couldn't happen when she wasn't experienced enough to run away from the turrets in time to escape. Test Chamber 17 with the beloved companion cube had the same issues. There were many actions and timing-based mechanics, which led to many failures and many deaths. At this point, we had a pizza break and then started on the longest test chamber, number 18, just to be met with the same action-based issues like before. When she finally trudged through to the final room, where you launch yourself with consistent momentum, she just couldn't do it. Carolyn was no longer having fun. Combining that with the fact that she had now been playing for 3.5 hours straight, we decided to stop without finishing the game. This was also the point I learned that my mic was muted the whole time, which made me even more sad. Carolyn enjoyed the beginning of the game, but the constant frustration and slow pace afterward bored her. The good news is that even if it was difficult, she was still able to functionally play the game in a 3D space, and Portal was able to teach her its unique mechanics without any problems. In other words, she had no problems figuring out what to do, she only had problems trying to complete whatever the game asked her to. Her words of just wanting to move on to another concept like a normal player really stuck with me. So I headed back to the drawing board and asked myself how I could make new players play Portal more like it's supposed to be played. But to do that, I had to find out how Portal was supposed to be played in the first place. So I found 3 blind playthroughs of the game on YouTube and charted out each player's time for every test chamber. What interested me is that each player solved each test chamber around the same time, which speaks to how much playtesting there must have been for this game. I rounded the 3 playthrough times to roughly get a sense of how long the developers wanted their players experimenting with an idea. I compared this average time to Carolyn's time with the game, and as I already noted, the first set of test chambers usually took her a bit less than double the time of a normal player. But when we got to the longer, more action-oriented test chambers, it took her around 3 to 4 times as long as an average player, which seemed to be too much, and that tossed her into an experience that bounced between frustration and boredom. For the first time, I hit a complete dead end in testing. I debated cutting my losses and canceling this video. But then I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could make a new player's playthrough more like Portal's intended experience by cutting out pieces of the current new player experience. From the data I gathered, it looks like the developers intended the game to be beaten in 2 to 3 hours. Around an hour and a half or 60% of the game's playtime should be in the test chambers, while the final hour or 40% of the player's playthrough should be escaping the lab and fighting GLaDOS. Carolyn played for 3 hours and just finished the test chambers. So my best guess was that it would take 5 hours for a new player to beat Portal, which was not quite the intended pace of the game. I was very apprehensive about this, but I decided for the next test to cut test chambers that overstayed their welcome for new players, in order to speed up the game to a point where it matches the intended pace of Portal more than it did in the first round of testing. Now, I know this thinking seems a little bit backwards, and I know the game technically isn't Portal anymore, it's a modified version of the game with less content and ideas, but I believed it could possibly make a better experience for new players. So I scanned through the data and found 3 test chambers that took new players much more time than intended to beat. I had to keep test chamber 16, the turret level, since players need to know what turrets are for later sections of the game, so removing them was not possible. But I decided to cut 2 of my favorite test chambers, Chamber 17 with the beloved companion cube, and Chamber 18 with the death of all laws of physics. It emotionally hurt me to do this, but based on Carolyn's run, cutting these 2 test chambers could save new players approximately a full hour. I also cut a more action-based area with these moving pipes in the escape section. One good thing is Portal makes it really easy to make these cuts. All you have to do is allow console commands and map each command to a key. So right after your player presses test chamber 16, you can press a button which teleports them to 19, and then teleport them to a later escape section when they fall down this pit. And with both of these, the new player shouldn't even notice anything. These cuts would fix most of the problems in a first playthrough, but there was still one more issue to deal with: the turrets. I experimented around and found out the best way to deal with them is to actually just pick up a block and charge at them. So I made another sheet which tells new players everything they need to know about turrets instead of forcing them to discover these things through trial and error. I wrote that the new player can last up to 3 seconds in gunfire due to new child-friendly bullets, and in the android uprising, players should charge towards the droids with a bulletproof storage cube that is sold separately. I had a bit of fun making this, if you can tell. It won't fix the problem entirely, but if the new player could just focus on defeating the turrets in this section, instead of also having to discover the best way to defeat them, it could help the player just a little bit. My final problem was that I didn't have a second test subject, but since I now knew Portal explained its mechanics well to brand new players, I thought I could use a test subject that had just a bit of gaming experience. So my mom was a saint and volunteered to be a test subject again, even after all the chaos that happened in the Deltarune video. She ran through my learning program really quickly, but once we booted up Portal, there was an issue. She was much slower than Carolyn at both figuring out what to do and completing whatever task the game asked her to do. On average, everything took my mom 53% longer to finish than Carolyn, or around 270% longer than a normal player. And although everything went mostly alright in the first few test chambers, she got motion sick with these moving platforms, so we stopped for the day. When we started up again, my mom really enjoyed playing. It was the simple things, like timing these perilous jumps over acid and playing with momentum, all of which are new ideas that people can only experience in this art form. However, everything seemed to take a turn for the worse when she reached the 2 remaining test chambers that also gave Carolyn a lot of trouble. My mom had great difficulty pulling off the triple portal jumps in test chamber 15, but learning how to do them is what makes the test chamber necessary, since you have to use triple portal jumps constantly in the escape sequence. My mom's playthrough of the turret test chamber actually went a bit better than Carolyn's, probably because of the new instruction sheet I gave her. After 3 hours of test chambers, she was really sick of them, so I felt quite a bit better about skipping her to the escape. When she actually got out of the test chambers, my mom was really lost and confused about what she had to do, which I guess is part of the experience. She was very overwhelmed by the lack of clarity and direction throughout the whole escape sequence. When she fell through the floor here, I teleported her a bit ahead again. She enjoyed a bit of the escape and the joys of always figuring out what to do next, but not having a clear sense of progression seemed to really frustrate her, especially at her much slower pace. She finally finished the escape sequence in 1 hour and 29 minutes. But there was one final obstacle that proved to be the biggest nightmare of the entire run: GLaDOS. So many action elements come into play at once in the finale, from timing rockets, throwing objects, avoiding enemy fire, and triple portal jumps, which all combine for one final test of the player's skills they've gained up to this point. The only problem is that it's on a timer, which is not too kind to players who don't have years of first-person shooter experience. So after 1 hour and 8 deaths, she finally defeated the rogue AI, and at this point she just felt done with the game. She completed Portal in 5.5 hours, which greatly exceeded my hopeful estimate of 4. Like Carolyn, my mom said Portal was fantastic in the beginning, but afterwards the tediousness of trying and failing to pull off certain actions over and over, to only be met with constant failure, really hurt the experience for her. And the worst part was that I didn't know anything else in the game that I could have changed to make her playthrough better. So I want to revisit this game after I make a better version of my FPS program, and maybe even a whole phonics game curriculum for non-gamers, and put Portal in after a few easier games. However, to make something like that, I'll need a lot more test results and a lot more data. On that note, I'm already finishing up a system where gamers and non-gamers alike submit their phonics game playthrough data by just playing my phonics games. So if you want to help me with that, subscribe and stay tuned. But if you want to play Portal with a non-gamer now, you can check out the video about my first version of the FPS training program, linked right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the flip side. Bye.